So before I begin, I was going to bring a colleague of mine, Soraya Hafez, with whom I have worked for many, many years on projects, and who is very well known in this city. And she was a scholar that taught Arabic at the University of Alberta. And we were working on a project that dealt, incidentally, with food and food culture in Islam. Unfortunately, Soraya had a stroke a month and a half ago that has rendered her paralyzed and incapable of speaking and incapable of moving, and so I'd like to dedicate some of what I am going to say here to her. The second thing is that she had already finished parts of her paper. So I think what I will do with your generous approval is I will read a little bit about her paper, which is entitled Sathain, Women, Hospitality and Food in Islamic Culture, as part of the introduction, and then if I have time I'll end off with a few remarks about what I see as critical areas of exploration in Islamic culture when it comes to feasting and all this. So if that's okay with you, I will go ahead and do that. So let me read then what Soraya has written. Sathain, to your health, which is said in Lebanon, Syria, and Palestine. Bilhana wa Shifa, which is to your health and happiness, which is a characteristic you hear in Egypt. And Saha wa Afya, which is to health and strength, you hear in Egypt, Sudan, and Libya. All signal a distinctive cultural meaning for hospitality and food in these predominantly Islamic countries. These linkages live on in Canada to some extent and continue to have an impact in the way that families organize festive occasions here. So this writing addresses the way that ancient cultural traditions have been carried on through Quranic concerns for social welfare of the Ummah and have been enshrined in the daily living practices of women establishing and maintaining an Islamic home. The importance of food, rituals of dining, the social dimensions of hospitality, and the distinctive character of food preferences is an academic realm of growing significance, as a number of recent scholarly books indicate, and she quotes Fleming, Chanine, and Schistler. The area indeed is much too large to address in this short piece, let alone to place an Islamic social value on the matter. Nevertheless, a few points can be noted by way of introduction to a topic that may help guide the reader. Defining the Islamic character of food culture is a matter of some debate. For example, one would be hard-pressed to identify what is specifically a Christian food culture. Likewise, it is difficult to explain what food might be construed as Islamic. Apart from the specific requirements of halal in choice of diet, other foods may be derived from very old sources that predate the development of Islam, yet they're now regarded as Islamic. A flavor of these theoretical problems can be gleaned from the current controversy over what constitutes so-called Israeli food, since much of the food in that country derives from a long-time Arab, Islamic, and Palestinian environment. And she cites Gavion and Douglas. While there are a number of issues that revolve around these food identities, my focus here is not to address this debate, but to move in another direction, and that is how we encourage young women to establish an Islamic home. Food preparation and hospitality codes shape this enterprise, and so this will be the main point that I will address here. Now, this is necessarily a very personal exploration since customs vary from place to place and across time. However, I hope we can explore some of the abiding values instilled in those of us who adhere to the time-bound truths which many insist are part of an Islamic culture. So I will walk you through the customs and traditions that I grew up with in a small urban setting in Egypt and brought with me when I migrated to North America. And I will attempt to trace the style of living I experienced as a little girl in Mahalla, and then follow that through to establishing my own home abroad. It will take us through my immigration and my reflections on the changes I see both here and in Egypt. Consequently, the following section will deal with my reflections on the role of women in Islamic festive occasions. The second will explore women as a central feature of Islamic family life. And the third will deal with those indicators of change that I perceive occurring both in Canada and in my homeland of Egypt concerning the role of women in food culture in Islam. So, reflections on life in Egypt. Festive Islam. In my house, my father insisted that the food had to be the very best, no matter the expense. In some other houses in the neighborhood, there was always a contention about what they could make and what they could afford. It made for an exciting time for children to be party to these discussions. These discussions are always part of the run-up to Eid festivals. The second recollection concerning Eid al-Adha. My father used to buy 2 live lambs, and he placed them on the penned roof. My brother and I used to play with them when they were tiny, and we were responsible for feeding them. There was a door to the roof, and we went up there to feed and play with them. And for some reason, one of them always died. I don't know why, but as the other one got larger, she or he would run after us. My brother held the horns while I ran to put the food down, and then I raced back to the door, and my brother would hope that the sheep went for the food while he escaped. The day of the Eid, my father went to the mosque for the Eid prayer early in the morning, and he returned with the butcher. And when the butcher came for the sheep, to my surprise, it walked peacefully behind him. My brother and I couldn't believe how tame he was. To this day, it's a mystery to me. He was slain in the bathroom, where there was a drain to wash the blood away. The sheep was skinned, and the sheepskin was washed, and it was salted to cure, and it was laid out on the roof to dry. And after it was finished drying, it was brought downstairs, and it was placed in a favorite location. We all liked to sit on it to read. Everyone enjoyed its softness. The meat of the sheep was always divided up, with parts sent to the poor who were waiting outside the mosque. I always liked to go there to do that. And the rest, some was boiled with small pieces of bread added along with rice, and it was topped with a sauce of garlic, vinegar, and pieces of fresh tomato. The whole dish was called fatah. Some additional meat was cooked in tomato sauce and was combined with a salad. My grandparents came to join us. We loved this moment because when they came in, they had idea, that is, money gifts for the kids. So around 10 o'clock in the morning, we all sat down to eat these delicious dishes. It was a grand time. My memory of Ramadan. Throughout the month before Ramadan, we stocked up on amaradin. It's sheets of dried apricot, figs, dates, nuts, and prunes. A fresh dessert is made every night. These desserts might be katayef, that is circles of dough like small pancakes, filled with nuts and then dried and drizzled with syrup. The day before Ramadan, we had to eat salted fish called fishik. It is served with bread and green onion, onions soaked in vinegar and fresh lettuce, etc. The idea is that we eat this before Ramadan because it would make us thirsty during the fasting month, and we would want to drink. We do not want to be thirsty during the fast. Dates, of course, are very important because we break the fast with dates, a tradition that goes back to the Prophet. The first day of Ramadan was so exciting. Throughout the month I got to stay up late. I stayed up until 3 when we had suhoor, and then we got to sleep as late as we wanted. And when I did get up, the house was in great commotion. Everything was upside down. Everything was being cleaned and washed in preparation for the feast. Everything had to be spotless. Since I seemed to be always awake at suhoor, I would wake everyone up, even my neighbors across the street. During suhoor, my father insisted on fool with butter and a touch of salt, bread, yogurt, and tea. Other families enjoyed elaborate meals with eggs, vegetables, and rice. In Canada, some families have a full meal of steak, potatoes, salad, kunafa, etc., but I keep the modest Egyptian meal here. Starting Ramadan, kushaf is made. That is a combination of all the dried fruit and nuts placed in a bowl. Once cut up into small pieces, they are covered with water for a whole day, and they're used at night after we break the fast. Amaradine is soaked in water too, and it makes a delightful drink to be used when breaking the fast. There are special foods made during Ramadan. Stuffed grape leaves, green peppers, macaroni with bechamel sauce, special rice baked in an oven with milk, kunafa for dessert, that is shredded dough made in 2 layers with a filling of nuts, baked, and syrup is poured over the whole. We broke the fast with fresh dates. Special drinks during this period were tamra-hindi, karkade, which are dried rose petals and translated as hibiscus in Canada, and it is boiled in hot water. While we love these drinks during this festive time, people sometimes made them at other times. We, however, usually had them only at Ramadan. Before the Eid, Mother would take me shopping and take me to the dressmaker to have a new dress made. All the kids had to have something new. We were all new from top to bottom. So the night of the Eid, we all had to have a bath. We crawled into fresh sheets with rooms spotless, everything smelling so fresh, the sound of Kulthum wafting in through the windows from the nearby cafe, singing that unforgettable Ya Lil Eid, that is spelling magic for me. My first reflection deals with the memories of Eid al-Fitr and the cookies my mother and her sister baked 10 days before the Eid. There were 2 kinds of cookies. The main one was called kak. The other was variously named pitafor, gurayiba, or biscuit. Making kak was a lengthy process involving making the dough, creating a filling, shaping the dough into balls, introducing the filling into the ball, and then each ball is hand decorated. A great pan of kak would be sent to the baker, since we did not have anything more than a small clay oven on the roof. When they came back, a boy carried this big pan of baked kak on his head. It was always exciting when he arrived back to our house. Then icing sugar was sifted on each of them after they cooled. Later on, I learned that the kak is deliberately shaped like the sun, with uneven surfaces to hold the icing sugar. At the end of Ramadan, at the Eid al-Fitr, we ate fish because throughout Ramadan we had eaten only meat and fowl. The second day we had turkey. My grandparents came and gave us idea. My grandfather took us on a short walk as a treat to Tanta or Mansoura, or a trip perhaps on the train, and that was a special treat. If I got angry at something, he came back and imitated me in front of my parents. Everybody laughed, and that was the basis of our festival. So I've read this because what it does is brings the Eid right down to the level of what a child encounters in a religious environment in Islam. And so my final comments about this, and we can discuss this, I've brought together about 5 different elements that I see operating in the Islamic feast. And each of these have distinctive ingredients in them that can be elaborated on and modified, but I think these 5 things give us a kind of basic structure that we can look at from an Islamic point of view. The first point about the feast or the festival in Islam is that it is absolutely and completely official. That is, everyone in the whole society accepts that this is the official expression of the whole community's perception of a number of things. Time, that is religious time. Secondly, ceremonial time, that is the ceremonial year is understood and recognized. Thirdly, it's political, because the government often releases prisoners on the Eid, and there is a huge celebration. And fourthly, it's cultural, because all institutions in the whole country will provide idea or gifts, food and other kinds of things for the poor. So from that perspective then, the festival time is an absolutely official time, and you don't break that official moment at all. The second thing that is critical in the feasting understanding, of course, is food. And that means that food is not something that just appears. There's a long provision that goes into it. And one of the things that I notice about many of the studies is that they ignore the role of women in providing this food. And so I think one of the dimensions of a study of feasting has to be the role of the providers, whether those providers are slaves, or whether they are people of some significance like bakers in the community, or whether they are the women. I think it's important to see that many different strata in society participate in the production of this food, and it is not like just automatic that it comes there. And so we have to understand the role of preparation of food and all of that in order to understand the Islamic notion of feast. And another thing that I think we should bring up when we're talking about food is resource demands. I mean, I think about Soraya and her sheep on the roof. There can't be many families that can afford to have a sheep on the roof. I mean, I don't think it would be legitimate to have it in Edmonton. But the interesting thing is then that there are resource demands that are laid on society from a feast. It is a significant contribution. It is a significant allocation of funding that's required for a feast. And so that means that food makes demands, and feasting makes demands that are critical in some ways in the way in which a presentation is made. The other thing that I think we have to keep in mind is then that feasting has a serious economic dimension to it. It is not a happenstance kind of thing. And I can remember even in my family, there was a great deal of discussion that went on between my mother and my father over how much we could provide for the family feast at Christmas time. So there was an allocation of resources from even within a family that is necessary. So we can see that feasts and food and all of this make an economic demand that is worth us having a look at. The third thing that I think we should look at when we're talking about the Islamic feast is the dimension of festivals. That is, this is a marking rite. It separates the beginning of the end of one period and the beginning of a new period. It is a boundary definitional issue. And so therefore the festival has a boundary characteristic implicit in it. And you cannot talk about feasts and feasting from a festival perspective unless you talk about this boundary element that is critical to separating this section of the community off from this section of the community. The fourth aspect of this is feasting as participation. So from a Muslim standpoint then, the feast is not automatic. It requires skill development. It is not as if everybody knows how to put on a feast. And so one of the things that we have to look at from an Islamic standpoint is how do you develop the skills that you can properly celebrate the Eid al-Fitr? How do you develop the skills that you can provide the kinds of activities that people will feel welcome at? Each of these things then imply a participation not just from the local population, but a recognition of a kind of official religious aura that passes in the feast. That is, the feast has to have a relationship to a doctrinal or a larger umbrella of values and structures that are implicit in the religious character of the people. And so you don't serve some kind of food there that is not recognized as having this kind of festive character to it. So even determining what kinds of spices go into food implies a huge skill development with regard to cultural issues that are absolutely necessary when you do an examination of Islamic feasts. And finally, some of the values that are implicit in the Islamic feast I think are worth looking at. The first one is reciprocity. No feast in an Islamic context is without reciprocity implicit in it. If I have you for an Eid dinner this year, it's almost required of you next year to have me back. And it's not enough that I just invite you for a dinner at any old time. I have to officially recognize your generosity at this moment, and I have to replicate that in another moment. And I think we might meditate upon the whole issue of the role of reciprocity in feasting, you know, across the whole spectrum, because it sounds to, from some of the discussions we've had this morning, it seems to be pretty clear that reciprocity is a critical element in feasting, because if you go to a foreign country and you are welcomed with a great feast by the king or by the sultan or whoever, the implication is that when he comes to visit your place, you're going to put on a big show for him too. I mean, we even see this in Obama and the White House, right? So the role, and in fact, one time when I was in Egypt, I was stunned by a newspaper article that said that the feast given in Washington to, I think it was Hosni Mubarak, was not up to the same par as the one that had been given to Netanyahu. So if you make a distinction between the number of plates and the kind of cutlery you have in a thing, we're talking about reciprocity in a big way. You know, there's all kinds of issues going on here. Among Muslims, of course, there is the gifting issue. Soraya talks about that. The other value that is implicit in feasting in Islam is renewal. So without feasting, it's very hard for you to feel that this is a new Muslim year. And one of the issues I noticed about from my own work in the Muslim world, I missed that whole kind of cultural renewal thing when I came back to Canada. Canada seemed very flat. You know, not all families get together here for Christmas. And there's not a big deal about having everybody at the table. But I can tell you in Egypt, young boys, young men, if they were living with a girl, you know, nobody was supposed to know about this, but if they were living with a girl, they all went home for the Eid. Everybody was at home around the table. Everybody who claimed any kind of allegiance must be there. So this is a renewal of family ties, a renewal of identity, a reaffirmation of who they are. Those kinds of values, I think, are something that has to be taken into consideration when we talk about feasting in Islam. And finally, I would try to argue that in Islam, the feast has not just a communalism as its focus, but a kind of transformation. The feast there not only affirms the past, but it transforms the group into a new kind of entity, because it is at the Eid festival that new children are introduced. If there's been babies born, that's when they're recognized. They are presented with gifts. They are expressions of the continuity of the group. So there is many different kinds of dimensions of transformative characterization in the Islamic feast. And these are some of the things I think we should pay attention to. Thank you.